All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this final installment in the Top 35 Operational Processes to Automate webinar series that we have been running for UK schools. So thanks for jumping on board for this final session. I can see there are still a few people coming into the webinar just because I know it's only just on the hour now. So I'm just hoping that in the meantime, while we just give those people a couple of minutes to get settled, if some of you who are already on the call, you'll notice there is a question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. If you could just type into that box and confirm that you can both hear me and see the nice purple presentation slide on my screen that I'm sharing. So if you confirm in that box that you can hear and see, that will be fantastic. All right, fantastic. Got a few of you through now. Excellent. Yes, can hear and see. Perfect. All right, so thanks for confirming that. What I'm going to do, I am just going to put myself back on mute for a couple of minutes to let those folks still streaming in get settled, and then we'll kick off properly a couple of minutes past. All right, speak to you soon. All right, we've given it a couple of minutes now, so I am going to get started now. A few more people have come into the session and have had the chance to get settled. So hello and welcome to today's Offeroo EdTech webinar. So thanks so much for joining us. And today we're going to explore a subsection of the top 35 operational processes that schools and mats like yours have digitized in Offeroo throughout 2021 and in preparation for this new academic year. This session will look at digitizing and automating tasks, processes, and forms designed to engage your broader school community, specifically students and members of the public who sit outside your systems of record and registered staff, students, and parents. We'll then demonstrate some of these core workflows live so you can see how to automate similar resource-intensive operational processes at your own school or mat. And time permitting, we will finish up with a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So this is the second week and the final session in our series of top 35 operational processes to automate at UK schools in 2021. It's been a really good series and I see some familiar faces on this call as well. So thanks so much for being a part of this session, as many of you have for the others that have taken place throughout the last fortnight. So last week we had sessions on parent workflows, staff workflows, and a eForms Masterclass. This week we kicked off with one focusing on health workflows. Yesterday we had a session dedicated to the best practices for managing paperless school trips. And today we are finishing with a look at student and public workflows. So from student subject selection, agreements and activity signups, things like that, to public workflows like things like volunteer signups, event registration and ticketing, and contactless visitor check-ins, things like that. And we have been recording all these sessions. So if you've missed any, we will follow up and ensure that you have the recordings to all of them. So my name is Lachlan James, Offeroo's Head of Marketing, and I'm also joined by UK Sales Director Tom Owen, who's going to walk you through today's demonstrations. And just before we get started properly, a little bit of housekeeping. As attendees, you are all set to mute to help with audio quality. However, if you do have questions during the webinar, there is a question box in the corner of your screen. So please enter any questions that you have into that box, and we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll follow up afterwards if we do run short on time. Also, we are recording this session today as well. So everyone who's registered will be sent a link to the recording by the end of this week. Additionally, all registrants will receive a free copy of Offeroo's Best Practice Guide, Top 35 Operational Processes UK Schools Should Automate in 2021. And to develop this resource, we analysed the 200 plus manual tasks and processes that we've helped schools automate this calendar year and compiled a summary of the most frequently used and automation worthy. So apologies in advance if some of you have heard this before, but I do see some new faces on this call as well. And there is a mix of people on this call. So people have joined us throughout the last fortnight, folks who we've been working with for a while, some people that are only beginning their journey with Offeroo in terms of process automation, and some people that I doubt have ever heard of Offeroo before, and are probably just starting to think about how they can streamline recurring operational tasks at their school or MAT, but as I said, aren't really familiar with what we do. So I just want to spend a couple of very quick minutes explaining who we are, what we do, to provide a little bit of context to today's session, and to then sort of give some bit of an outline as to why we have the authority and the expertise to speak on this topic today. So essentially, Offeroo is a school operations platform used to automate processes and digitally manage workflows. And essentially, we're helping thousands of schools and other organisations with a duty of care around the world to eliminate slow, expensive and repetitive paper-based tasks. And essentially, Offeroo enables schools to save time and resources by automating these operational tasks, which therefore increases staff productivity, parental engagement and student participation. And when it comes down to it, our goal is to empower schools and MATs to use every minute and every pound possible on student education rather than wasting resources on operational inefficiencies. So this is a bit of a bird's eye view of Offeroo in action, and really Offeroo provides the canvas upon which you can automate any school process. And this is kind of at a very high level, that type of workflow journey that takes place. So you start with a pre-built template or create your own custom form, request or piece of communication. You then add any approval workflow steps necessary, enabling certain people to authorize content before its distribution. You then automatically distribute that content to any selected audience, be they parents, staff, or students, based on any data attributes known about specified recipients within the Offeroo platform. And as a completely cloud-based and mobile-ready solution, you'll receive responses within minutes from any device or operating system. You can then trigger follow-up actions based on the responses that you receive. So that's where you can get really clever with the automations that you build into your workflow. You can securely collect any type of data that you need. So things from consents, payments, medical information, or anything else required. And automated reminders do the chasing for you until missing information is submitted. So it really reduces a lot of that manual legwork there. And finally, you can track, analyze, and act on responses received with filters, charts, and dashboards. So essentially, Offeroo is a school operations and productivity platform that digitizes and streamlines, all your slow, repetitive, paper-based, or just disconnected processes in one place. So from things like multi-language school forms and consents for parents and students, to staff forms and approval workflows, parent communications, payments and ordering, end-to-end school trip management, medical data collection and verification, and many more. And as I said, recently we sat down and compiled a list of the top 35 operational processes that schools are automating over the last calendar year. And we did this by analysing the 200 plus operational workflows we've helped schools streamline in 2021, sort of picking out the most common, and as I said, the most automation worthy ones. And this is a bit of a look at that list. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but this is it at a high level. And we've got things in here from pre-admissions and induction to student medical cards, parent-teacher conference management, request management, event registration and ticketing, of course, consent forms, daily announcements, communications, and many, many more. And with that context set, let's really dive into the presentation proper today. And more and more often, schools and MATs are, disseminating, requesting, collecting, and acting on information from people who, sit outside their core, user groups, I guess, so they're doing a lot of that from parents and staff. However, increasingly digital and, sophisticated methods of community engagements are driving demand to automate the transfer of information between students and third parties as well. So that is people who traditionally sit outside your management information system. And we'll split today's discussion into two parts. So kicking off with a look at the top student workflows to consider automating, and finishing with an exploration of the public workflows that we're seeing schools build into their process automation and digitization journey. In this first section, we'll assess and demonstrate common student-facing workflows such as subject selection, student contracts and agreements, club and activity registration. And then, really looking at how engaging students directly can be, I guess, the most efficient way to gain input from your student body. But it's also worth indicating from the outset that we do fully appreciate many of these workflows really pertain to senior secondary school students. So just to make that really clear that we're not so naive with some of these, and some of these we do recommend that you kind of might deliver to both students and parents simultaneously and sort of get co-sign off for things. But we'll walk through that. So the first section is going to look at student workflows. As I said, we'll talk about public workflows in the second section. So there's 9 student workflow examples to get through. So let's get stuck into it. So at Offeroo, we're big advocates of skipping the middleman when it comes to distributing, requesting and collecting information from parents, and that's why letters and forms for parents sent home via students' school bags really should be a thing of the past these days. And similarly, there are instances where parents take on that middleman role. They inadvertently do that, and the quicker route to success can be taken by going directly to students themselves. And a good example comes in the form of student induction. So at the start of each school year, there are a bunch of smaller use case specific workflows within that sort of overarching induction process that can be directed to students for greater efficiency. So I'm talking about things like digitally distributing student handbooks, locker allocation, preference sheets, even order forms for school uniforms, or end of school balls or DEBs, as well as sign-ups for a range of academic and extracurricular programs as well. And there's a point here to note. You can set these workflows up to suit your school's preferences and procedures. So for example, if you want parent oversight regarding information and choices submitted by students, you can include parents on requests and even embed additional fields, such as student and parent signature fields as well. So this is obviously a specific sort of start of year process containing multiple individual little workflows that can apply directly to senior students, but there are also more specific workflow examples which we've seen demand for throughout the school year. So let's get on and talk about some of those, but there's a few within that student induction process. And on that note, number 2, student contracts. So, we're also seeing more and more schools automatically distributing student policies, agreements, and contracts directly to students themselves, from things like, mobile phone safety and safety, and discipline contracts, things of that sort of nature, to, internet usage agreements, new school policies, such as updated uniform expectations, things like that, behavioural expectations of whichever school they attend, and many, many more. So we're seeing a lot of these go directly to senior school students as well. And again, we're seeing a lot of these sent out by schools who also have like a co-signature field for their parents as well. But really sending these directly to senior students to really ensure they've got some, I guess, autonomy, with their schooling. And I guess number 3, every year, term or semester, depending on the type of school and year level, students across the UK schooling system select the subjects or, courses they want to undertake. And that's a large recurring process involving the collection and collation of large quantities of data, as well as subsequent follow-up actions such as internal approvals, acceptance or rejection notifications, and teacher communications. And by automating this process, you can receive, student course preferences within minutes or days, not weeks or months. And you can also easily, route responses to the right person at the right time, so to the careers counsellor or the assistant principal, to avoid unnecessary scheduling delays. And you can automatically trigger follow-up actions based on submissions received, including the distribution of student contracts. So we talked a bit about that before, on onboarding or induction documents, handbooks, fees, and more. So we're seeing a lot of use in that area. Number 4, I've also seen strong automation demand with regards to student surveys and elections. So, by digitizing the process and sending questionnaires and feedback forms directly to students, schools are able to easily promote superior student voice. So we're seeing a bit of an uptick there. Number 5. Now, this next workflow could have been broken down again into sort of individual, I guess, workflows or use cases, but we're covering ordering and payments here as sort of an overall workflow category, just to make it simple and for the sake of time. So, the ability to also, embed payment options in digital forms and processes really is an enormous time saver for many of the schools that we work with, for things like school fees, uniform purchases, extracurricular activities, and more. And more and more, we're seeing schools wanting to support, I guess, the growing independence of older students by empowering them to pay for a range of things from, uniform ordering, school supplies, and talked about extracurricular activities before. However, this is definitely one of those workflow examples where we'd recommend adding in some parental oversight. So, with form fields requesting things like, as I said, co-signatures from parents as well. So, you can sort of really strike that balance between independence and, making sure, as I said, that you've got some sign-off and some oversight from parents and guardians. So number 6, so more broadly, I've sort of touched on this very quickly, but as a workflow category by itself, sort of club sign up and program registration. Again, another workflow area that's mainly aimed at older students. It's, as I said, the digitization of club, team, and program signups. And traditional, manual, time-consuming, and awkward registration processes really can stifle participation in, extended school programs and also extracurricular programs that are set up as well. And that's why schools are increasingly looking to understand demand faster and remove barriers to participation so that they can offer students, more options when it comes to extracurricular activities and optional, study support programs, those sorts of things. Because obviously, if you don't have the numbers and you don't know what those numbers are as early as possible, you can't run them. So we're seeing some really good outcomes in that respect, which are allowing some of the schools we work with basically to offer students more, which is really good. All right, COVID testing management. So again, this is something that we could have, again, broken down into individual workflows, but again, for the sake of clarity and time, we're presenting them as a category of COVID-safe workflows. We also cited this workflow as part of Tuesday's Health Workflows webinar. And in this instance, we're really focusing on a narrower subset of workflows, mainly with regards to managing COVID testing and quarantine. So, throughout the last 18 months, schools across the UK have been tasked with the challenge of operating amidst the new normal, which, is pretty challenging for everyone. And Offeroo's health checks, recurring eForms, and trigger actions, and some of these things Tom will touch on in his demonstration, have been used widely to help implement the systemised processes needed to both keep school communities safe and ensure schools are able to remain focused on addressing the educational needs of its students rather than managing manual COVID processes. And in this regard, as schools have continued to adapt to life alongside the pandemic, as well as shifting government requirements and safety advice, we've seen more schools looking to send certain workflows directly to students. So while testing consents generally still need to be obtained from parents, given the age of most students, there are some instances where directly communicating with students increases response rates and the speed of those responses as well. So for example, sending daily COVID symptom checkers before face-to-face learning each morning can be, sent to senior students for quicker turnarounds. And then, date-stamped digital building passes can then be automatically sent straight to the students' phones so that, they can present those when they come to school and, they're safe, symptom-free, and should be on campus. Another example is quarantine management and resultant remote learning requirements. So, should students, their family members or close contacts receive a positive test result, many schools are opting to send information directly to students, as well as their parents, regarding isolation requirements and remote learning protocols as well. Okay, number 8, school and DFE letters. So, in the first session of this webinar series, which we held Tuesday a week ago, the last parent-facing workflow we highlighted was the digital distribution of school departmental or diocese letters. So like consent forms, we've worked with schools to deliver memos, letters, and announcements straight to parents' smartphones, which really help close that school family communications loop. And increasingly, we're seeing further success by also sending select updates straight to students' phones as well, particularly for in-school activities and occurrences such as out-of-school uniform days. So another example is Nhs Vaccination Letters, as there's both a student and parent version. So we're working with schools to digitize this piece of communication, electronically distribute it to students, and then automatically map return forms back to the official Nhs PDF format for record keeping. So a couple of examples there of those types of letters that are being digitized and sent straight to students. And speaking of communications, our last student-facing workflow addresses the dissemination of school news as it relates to students. So in our partnerships with schools, we've come to realize that the whole school newsletter has its place, but it's also an outdated mode of communication with different cohorts or segments of your school community really requiring far more specific and often time-bound news distribution. So that is the ability to distribute tailored digital news feeds to specific groups in real time, from event notifications, news items, reminders, and announcements, those sorts of things. And we've seen growing successes and demand regarding the dissemination of group-based news to student cohorts directly. So, for example, things like directly notifying students participating in school sports programs regarding schedules for the next day of competition, or reminding senior students about upcoming exam timetables, things of that nature. So with those 9 different workflow examples kind of outlined there, I do want to throw you over to Tom so we can actually show you some of these student-facing workflows in action.
Lovely, thanks, Lachlan. Let's share my screen. Okay, so what I want to do today is walk you through the student view of Offeroo and give you some examples, some of which Lachlan's already touched upon, about how students or how you can interact with your students within the Offeroo system. It's worth saying with our MIS integrations, your students are automatically synced into the back end of the Offeroo system. From that administration login, you can decide who then has a student account and who you then want to distribute information to. As a student, I'm sent a unique login. I click on an email with those details and I'm into the Offeroo system. It's really important when we're distributing this information that we're doing it securely, because if you're using products like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms or just sending out emails to them with secure information in, you need to consider how the person filling in the information is correct and the potential impact of this on your GDPR compliance. The view we can see on screen right now is Offeroo Central, and I'm in the mobile browser version of Offeroo Central. From here, I can access any forms or any data that a school wants to send me. This is available on any device. As I said earlier, I'm in the mobile browser version. We also have iOS and Android apps, so if I'm on mobile or tablet, I can use those. And we've got our browser version, so we can use it on desktop, laptop, or a mix of all of those different devices. It's available 24/7 with 24/7 support for your staff, for your parents, and for your students as well. So it doesn't matter if the student is using any of these different devices, they have access to all the same interface and information, whether they are in school or whether they are at home or working remotely. Now, the screen we've got here is Offeroo Central, and I've got a number of different things which I, as a student, need to action within the system. The first thing is this news at the top. You can see I have a new news article to read. This is what Lachlan was talking about in terms of distributing information either to your whole student body or to specific groups based on specific criteria. So members of a certain club, or members who are going on to do certain activities or have certain criteria, whether that's medical details, things like that, based on specific criteria. Who do we want to get what bits of information? And news articles can be used for all kinds of different things. If I come in and view my news article, we can see that this is for rugby club tryouts. So I can see the information for rugby club tryouts and when they might be happening. If I head back to Offeroo Central, I've also got a series of requests which I need to complete. Now, Every time you send me as a request as a school, I get a notification of that, whether that's by email, if I've got the Offeroo app, that might be by push notification, or it might be by text message. I get a notification asking me to come in and complete the specific form or action which you want me to complete. If I don't complete it, then I will get a reminder at a frequency set by you as a school. So, for example, my student contract, which I have in here at the moment, every 2 days, I might get a reminder that I need to come and complete this student contract. I'm going to start with our student feedback form for trips. I'm going to come in and click respond to that. Now, this is an example of a survey which is sent out for students. So trying to get students to engage in process. And this particular one is sent to me off the back of a trip. So I need to complete details about whether a trip was worthwhile, what details I got, what I liked about the trip, what I didn't like about the trip, any other details which you might want to collect. And this is just one example of a kind of survey which you could send out to your students. With all of our forms, I've got the ability as a student to fill in this information, but I've also got my save for later button down at the bottom. So I can always come in and submit these things at a later date. Let's head back out and look at my next form down, which is a student contract. Again, this kind of student contract, which you send out to students, is completely customizable, whatever your particular setup is. But in my particular example, I can see at the top when I've got to respond to it by, I've got a series of things outlined for me. I've then got a document which I need to download and read, which is an accompanying student contract, which I need to see. And then I've got a single signature in here, which will be my signature. I'm going to use my finger to sign here, but this might be an example of the kind of form which you want to send to parents and students to get two different signatures, one of a parent and one of a student, on the same form to agree to a student contract. And let's submit that form. So when it comes to your collection of that kind of data, collecting these student contracts, you're not having to do any chasing of those students. As a student, I get a notification, I can view the information you want, I can sign what you need me to sign and return it easily on any device. The final thing which we've got in here, which I need to respond to, is a COVID-19 lateral flow test. This is if I log in here, this is a very simple form where I've been asked to give the results of my lateral flow test for today. It's just a really nice way of reminding your students that they have to take those tests and reminding them of that detail. So I'm going to say my test was negative, and then I'm going to submit that response. Okay, now finally, once I submit all of these forms, you'll see they sit down here in my responded items, including things which I've filled in before. So I've got my student contract in there. I can also view things like activity choices. So what I've already completed, I can always come in and see that information. So like with our parents and with our staff, I've got a really simple login to Offeroo as a student. I can complete any information you want me to complete. Anything which isn't completed, I get reminders at a frequency set by you as a school for me to be able to submit that form. Okay, at this stage, let's hand back to Lachlan and we'll start to have a look at our public forms and public workflows.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm just going to grab that presenter control back from you. Perfect. All right. And as Tom just flagged, our second section that we're going to go through now looks at public workflows. So those processes that involve exchanging information with people who sit outside your immediate school community of registered staff, students, and parents. So we'll then demonstrate how to set up and seamlessly manage, digital forms and workflows for members of the public to utilize. So, from volunteer sign-ups, school open days, and contactless, visitor check-ins to things like, as I said before, event registration and ticketing, feedback surveys, and more. So here we're going to highlight 4 key types that have been getting a good workout this year. So again, we're doing a few sort of workflow categories here. So there's some multiple examples that will fit into each one. So together, Offeroo public eForms, which Tom will obviously show you through, and QR code recognition capabilities enable you to facilitate contact-free submissions for any form type from anybody, not just school staff and registered parents, as I said. So as you'd imagine, contactless visitor tracking has become paramount in the pandemic world as a prominent example within this category. And as it turns out, it's simply a more efficient way to manage visitors and deliveries on an ongoing basis. So a really prominent example from that category. Then there's event registration and ticketing that I've kind of flagged at a high level a couple of times before. So, you know, schools really do hold lots, or normal times anyway, and we're hopefully seeing a return to some of that normality. Schools hold a lot of events, from, you know, theatre productions to musical performances, information evenings, things of that nature. And many of these events are ticketed and attended by people outside the immediate school community. And so we're working with a lot of schools to help them, you know, create digital sign-up forms. So, you know, post them on and, you know, third-party web platforms such as their school website, to make them accessible to any interested party as well, being able to do things like embed ticket reservations and digital payment fields within those as well, even though they're publicly accessible. So some really clever technology built in there, and something that Tom will be able to show you through. Then there's, I guess, community consultations, engagements, and sign-ups, and, you know, things that fall under that banner. So, you know, schools often conduct initiatives, as I said, run events, or seek feedback from their broader community. So, you know, people who aren't necessarily registered. And ordinarily, this process can be pretty messy, manual, and really deliver unreliable submissions that are very difficult to collate and track. But with Offeroo public eForms, you can digitally collect, track, and analyze data submitted by people outside your four walls really easily. So use cases here include, you know, surveys, questionnaires, volunteer signups, feedback and registration forms, and like a really common example would be something like a school open day, you know, be it virtual or in person. And lastly, one specific digital workflow we're seeing increasing demand for at schools and colleges offering post-16 education is Bursary Management. Now, you know, this is a bit of a hybrid example, as it's a workflow chiefly designed for students, which is, you know, also usually implemented using Offeroo public eForms. So it's kind of bringing together those two concepts we're talking about today. And, you know, essentially students or parents can use Offeroo public eForms to check their eligibility for school funding assistance. And if they are eligible for support, then, you know, subsequent targeted forms can be sent to them via automated triggers once they've submitted that initial public eForm to check their eligibility. And we're also seeing schools use public eForms to enable students to submit receipts for bursary payments via school websites and things of that nature as well. So there's some of the categories around the public workflows and some of those top use cases we're seeing of that nature. So at this point, I am going to hand back again to Tom, who's going to show you through some of those live.
Brilliant, thanks, Lachlan. Okay, so we've switched now from our mobile version of Offeroo using the mobile browser. I'm now in my desktop browser because these are slightly more involved forms. There's slightly more detail in here. All of the forms which I'm going to walk through and all of these different processes are all public forms. So these are all available to anybody, either using a link or using something like a QR code to be able to access this specific form. So schools will embed these in websites, they'll put QR codes on posters or use them in school receptions and things like that for people to be able to access and submit data. I'm going to start with application forms. It's something which we see a lot of within our schools. I've got a sixth form application form in here. It could be that if you are an independent or a school who need application forms as part of your process, that you collect some initial information from a prospective parent using an Offeroo form. This form doesn't have a date by which I need to respond to it because it's available whenever I need it. But one thing we do have at the top here is selecting a preferred language. So if you're trying to engage parents either in this country with English as an additional language or parents internationally, then this is a really easy way to be able to do this. At any stage, I can come in here and update my preferred language. Let's go for Chinese Simplified. And then that form is going to be updated for me. So all of my questions, things like that, are going to be in my language which I've chosen. or I could reset to English. Now, this sixth form application form, like every other form within the Offeroo system, is customized to the specific requirements of that school. So for this particular one, I would need to fill in my name details. I've then got a series of different pathways I can choose for this particular sixth form. I choose a specific pathway. I fill in my details, and then at the bottom I have a workflow. Now, a workflow, it was mentioned at the start by Lachlan. Where do we want to move the data to within your school? Who needs to view this data? Who needs to approve this data? So in this particular example, once a potential parent or even a potential student completes this detail, it automatically goes to our admissions team. Our admissions team review that information, decide what the next steps might be. Now, the way I have this particular form set up is that I tick a box to say whether they should come in for a student interview, whether they should be booked onto an open day, various other options in there. And based on those options, that parent or the student who submitted this particular form will get requests to come in for an open day or come in for an interview, whatever the next part of their process is. But this isn't just sixth form admissions. Or for student admissions, we also see this for staff applications as well. So I've got an example here of an application form for teaching posts for my staff. Again, completely customized to my school's requirements. I've got to decide which school I want to apply for, the position. I've got to upload various documents like personal statements and CVs and things like that. And then this particular form is going to go to our HR team for review. But it doesn't just have to be that it goes to one person. It could be that it goes to multiple people with different layers. Once the HR team approve it, this goes on to somebody else for approval. Whatever the stages of your process are, you can manage it through Offeroo using our workflow tools or triggers off of specific actions. So something we see a lot with both sixth form applications and with job applications, we see the need to get details from a reference. So what we can do is automate that through a trigger. I complete my form, I tell you who the reference is going to be with an email address and a name. That email address automatically triggers an email to that address asking for a reference, and that reference is provided via another public form, which I've got an example of here. So this is a referee who's going to put in the details of the based on the specific requirements of that job application or sixth form admission or any other details which you require. So it's a really nice way of being able to collect all of these sorts of things with people who aren't actually in your school yet. Then prospective people coming into your school, you can manage all of these sorts of processes. Something which Lachlan talked about, which we're increasingly seeing being used within our schools, is bursary fund applications. This is one example which we have in here, and this again can take a multiple stage process to make sure that the right data is managed through your school. In this particular example, either a parent, guardian, or a student or somebody else can complete a form for this bursary application, but this first form is to establish eligibility criteria. So depending on your eligibility, depending on your setup for this, I need to fill out certain eligibility criteria, certain details, which I need to complete for that bursary form. And when that's submitted, based on my answers, I will then get a bursary form for me to complete if I am eligible for that next form. And that next form, in the same way, is complete. That next form can then be customized to the specific requirements based on those different details. And again, I've got a series of questions which I need to complete, upload attachments, all kinds of documents to make that bursary form available to me. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing. Going back into our student view, let's pull up my mobile again. There we go. Just to show you one additional step to our bursary setup. Within Offeroo Central, we have an area called our form library. That is for on-demand forms. So anytime a student wants to access these forms, they're available to them. Now, anybody who has gone through this bursary eligibility process, you can then make should you require them to submit receipts as part of your bursary process, you can then make that form available to them on an on-demand basis. And I can come in at any stage. If I come into my bursary form, I can complete and upload those details, and then that's going to go through a two-stage workflow. It's going to go to our admin team, they're going to check it, then it's going to go for financial approval to be paid. So we can manage that whole bursary process through a mix of public forms, and then once we've got that detail, student forms as well. Now, we also spoke about open days and booking these through Offeroo. Now, one thing which I wanted to highlight as part of signing up for an open day is our ability to, or one of our question types deals really well with limited availability of space. So you can see I've got a series of dates in here for open days, but one of them is unavailable to me. This is on the basis that a certain amount of parents or students have already signed up to that specific open day. So you know the amount of parents or students you're getting on that open day, and I only see what is available to me to book, so you don't get too many people arriving to a certain open day. Now, the other thing with these sorts of open days is we've seen schools using our triggers and our workflows to really automate big parts of this process. So, for example, with my open day here, a couple of days before this specific open day and this specific time, I'm going to get a message sent through to me which has got a reminder that I'm going to that open day. I'm also going to be sent a map for how to get there, where to park, some other information. And we've seen schools do follow-up actions off the back of this. So you've come to an open day, we're going to send you through an application form as a public form a week after you've been, or ask you for feedback, or ask you for a survey after that information. So you can automate all of these processes based on information which is completed in here using Offeroo's triggers. Another use which we're increasingly seeing is for booking tickets and payments within the system, which Lachlan alluded to earlier on. Here I have our 2021 student concert. I've got a range of different things I can do, and this is using Offeroo's simple carts to be able to book tickets for our concert. I can come in here and add a quantity. We've got limitations on different quantities. I can add those quantities. I then fill in all of my information, and when I go to submit that information, let's fill in my details, put in a phone number, an email address, put in my address details, my postcode, and when I go to submit and pay, then this is because I've logged out of this particular thing, but that would take me to a payment page to be able to pay. The other thing I wanted to show you, was I talked about making these accessible to members of the public in different ways you can do that. So I have a QR code here for a COVID-19 track and trace form. This QR code links to a specific public form. So you could put that QR code, as I said, on posters, you could put it on social media, anywhere that you want to distribute this information to members of the public. There is also a URL which is specific to that particular form, which I then need to complete. And this track and trace example is something which we see a lot being used in schools and has been used in schools over the last 18 months or so. And this type of form is designed to collect details of people coming into your school who are not students, not members of staff, so you have all of their details should you need them in a COVID emergency. So we have things like arrival date. When I scan that QR code, I'm then asked to go in and complete all of this information across these things and ask a simple question about COVID-19 symptoms. Then when I submit that form, I've got all of that detail available to me. And as an administrator within the back end of the system, I can say which of these members are in school, which of those have left, should we need them for things like a fire alarm or anything like that. And that's done completely without people having to come into contact with other people. It's done completely remotely as part of that process. So there's a wide range and a wide variety of different public forms which can be made available. But like all other Offeroo forms, these can be completely customizable, and you can share them with your community to collect any of this detail, any of these things which you want. So those are the public forms. That's the processes which we wanted to look through today. I'm going to pull back up our presentation and go back to our presentation screen. Now, this one is this presentation has been slightly shorter than the other things which we've done within our setup, but that does leave us a lot of good time for questions and things like that. So, Lachlan, I'll hand back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Tom. If you've been a part of our other sessions, you know we're always pressing up until the hour. So today we do have a little bit more time for some questions, which is a nice change up, I must say, from the other 5 sessions we've been doing. Let me see. All right, so I'm just going to open up that question panel. Okay, so there's a question here. It says, what question type do you use for the booking table so that it adds the amount by number of tickets required?
So that booking table which I had built into the system is using Offeroo Simple Cart. I can see that's from an existing school, so I'll get your client success manager to get in contact with you and walk you through how you could set that up for your school.
Cool. All right, excellent. Thank you, Tom. There's a question in here about the use of student forms and student workflows in the context of primary schools. And it just says, is this something we should consider, or is it really only for older students? Look, as I said, there are lots of use cases that really do, to be transparent, pertain pretty much to senior students in the secondary, especially if you're talking about maybe purchasing things, even if you're talking about small items, and choosing subjects and making important decisions like that. Though I would say I do think it's definitely worth considering potentially getting students involved in things like co-signing behavior agreements and school policies and things of that nature, because then it sort of gets them involved and takes a bit of ownership within those sorts of processes. So those sorts of ones, and as I said, they're definitely a co-sign thing where they're sent to parents and you have to get a parental signature as well. So things of that nature, it could be useful, as I said, to really get kids a little bit invested. But again, if we're talking about primary school, we'd probably be talking about the older kids within a primary school. So I hope that kind of answers that question. Probably predominantly for secondary, but there are some use cases like that, I think, for some of the older kids in primary school as well, so they can take a bit more, I guess, initiative within their schooling. There are a couple of questions, as there always seem to be, about pricing. So if you're so hopefully you've thought about some interesting things that you can sort of help to automate and digitize, irrespective of the technology that you're using. But if you are interested in how we can work with you and you're not already working with us, just type into the question box something like price or quote or something of that nature, and then we'll make sure that we know to get back to you with some of that information. So just wanted to head that one off there. Also, there is always one of these questions. Yes, we are recording today's session, so that will be sent out afterwards. Let me see. As another question that's come in here, and it says, is there a contactless way to verify students' passport and visas and capture their passport and visa details, which is also in line with UK VI's requirements? So I think the short answer to that is yes. I mean, we certainly do have a really good set of workflows around trip management, which does include overseas and international trips, and you can include attachment requests and things like that. And very often one of those things is for a student's passport, of course. Anything else you want to add to that one, Tom?
Yeah, so my only thing I would add to that is what I will do specifically as a follow up to this is I'll send you some examples of how we work with passports and visas and uploads of that kind of documentation. But the forms themselves can be absolutely customized to meet those specific requirements. So I'll send you a specific example of what that would look like, and how you can manage that, and whether that's something as part of that sounds to me like it's something which would be part of a prospective student. So a student coming in, being able to verify all that information before they come in. And we've got a couple of different ways of doing that, either through the students themselves and filling in those details, or we've got a couple of examples. If you use agents and things like that to manage those kind of processes, we've got some ways of making that available to agents as well. So I will give you a more in-depth follow-up to that following this webinar.
Yep, definitely. And look, it's also worth mentioning that yesterday's session that we ran was around managing paperless school trips, and I'll make sure you get a recording to that, as everyone will. But as part of that, I think Tom actually shows filling out an electronic, form with some medical details and things like that for a student to go on a trip, and then he also demonstrates how you can actually attach documents, including passports and things like that, within that form as well. So there is, from yesterday's session, a really specific example that goes a long way to addressing what you're talking about there. So I'll get that across to you and everyone else, and make sure you have a look at that as well, because that does actually show you what we're describing as well. Let me see. There was questions about mobile accessibility, because you showed your mobile at the start there. So does it work with every mobile? So the short answer is yes. So we've got applications for iOS and Android devices, and you can then also view, get into the Offeroo system and sign up via a mobile browser on any device if you're happening to use something that's not iOS or Android, which is not much these days. But if that is the case, then yes, you can access it via the mobile browser, and it's sort of a mobile configured version of Offeroo, so it conforms to the screen size and all those sorts of neat things as well. So the short answer to that is yes. Okay, and there's an interesting question here, and I probably should have addressed this. I think I've done this well in a couple of other sessions, but I'm going to blame this one being the last of the fortnight and me being tired. There's a good question here that says, basically, why are Offeroo forms better than Google Forms, but specifically when it comes to collecting information from the public? So that's not a bad question, actually, because, look, obviously, if you are needing to collect information from registered members of your school community, as we said before, students, staff, parents, there are lots of reasons why you want to link things back to specific registered users within your system, and do lots of smart things around that. But it's a good question when it comes to public forms, because obviously they're people from outside your four walls. So there's a few things to consider there, but the way in which our forms are set up and configured, and the way in which data is passed through them, is very, very secure. We've got lots of great data encryption and things on the back end that really make that a really secure process for submitting data. So much better than something like Google Forms, or something else you might think about using to collect information from people that aren't direct members of your school community. The other thing is, even if you're using public forms, the information that is collected through those processes and through those forms when they are submitted, all that is collated in one place. So you can find that within our form library. So what that does is it makes it really easy for you to be able to access and analyze and then act on the data that you have collected. And so that's like vastly superior compared to something like Google Forms, where you have to do a lot of manual reconciliation to work out what you've got, what you don't have, if there is a trend, can you analyze it, all that sort of stuff. And probably the other thing to mention off the back of that, Tom did touch on this with his example of bursary management, but there are plenty of use cases where you might kick off a workflow using a public form because you don't yet know those person's details. But if they qualify for something or whatever it is, you can then obviously capture their information, and then when that user becomes known through capturing their details, you can then trigger a bunch of automated actions that come off the back of that for subsequent requests and things that person needs or you require from them, or information you need to provide. So you can get much smarter with the workflows that you subsequently trigger off the back of that as well. So a few things to consider there. I hope that makes some sense. Now, Tom, they, for the moment, are the only questions that I can see. So we do have a few minutes left, but I've got a few slides just to wrap us up with. So look, I think I might move on and do that, but I do have a separate window open for the questions. And so if you do want to pop anything in there while I'm just wrapping up, I will get to it, because we've got a few minutes spare. So I'll just move to do that. But yeah, any last minute questions, feel free to put them in that question box and I will be able to get to them. But if there are no more questions for the moment, look, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today for this final session within this fortnight's worth of webinars. And I hope you found it really useful, irrespective of whether you're an Offeroo school or whether you're looking to work with us or you're just thinking about how you can digitize and automate lots of your school forms and processes and workflows generally. As I did say, it's been 6 sessions over the fortnight, and we will make sure that the recordings from all of those are distributed after the conclusion of this. So we'll make sure we get those out for your Friday and the end of the week. Also, if you found this session interested and you would like an idea about how schools are working with us in the real world, there are a couple of areas that I highly recommend you go and check out on our website. So the first one is if you go to our homepage, offeroo.com, and you find the Customers tab at the top, there is a drop down, and one of the sub tabs is Case Studies. If you click on the Case Studies drop down, you'll be directed to a page where you can find a bunch of really interesting interviews and examples of how schools in the real world across the UK and other parts of the world are using us to streamline and automate a lot of forms and processes throughout their school. So highly recommend you go ahead and check that out. The second place would be the Resources tab. Again, you can get to that off the homepage. And in the Resources tab, there is a heading that is Videos and Webinars. And if you click on that, you'll find a bunch of really great recordings in there, some of which you can see on your screen now. So there's one really good one that we did with Allerton High School that just focuses on automating pre-admissions. There's one that's totally focused on automating staff processes, and it's sort of an interview-based one that we did with Bishopsgate School, which I highly recommend. And you'll get one of these in the landing page with all the recordings that we follow up with tomorrow. But there is also from 4 or 5 months ago a really good session we did on managing paperless school trips. That's worth checking out. But as I said, you'll get one as recent as of yesterday within the follow-up that we will send out at the conclusion of this series tomorrow. So speaking of that, you will get a copy of today's recording, and we will make sure you can easily access the others as well, and we'll bundle it up in one nice accessible page that's super easy for you. That will include today's presentation slides, because there were a few that we went through. We'll also include a link to the other presentation slides from the other sessions that we've run throughout the past fortnight. And there will also be a link to the best practice guide on the top 35 operational processes UK schools should automate in 2021. And that sort of research that we did is what underpinned this webinar series that we have been taking you through over the past 2 weeks. So we will follow up and bundle all of that together for you. In the meantime, though, if you do want to reach out to us and you've got any questions or you'd like to understand how we might be able to help you, please feel free to do that. The best thing is to go to our website, and if you go to offeroo.com/contact sales, there's a little form to fill out there, and we'll get back to you straight away, and we'll have a chat and see what we can do for you. But again, thanks so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed your company and presenting this series to you over the last 2 weeks, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.